Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the UNCTAD-UNECE Regional Policy Dialogue, the role of competition policy in supporting MSMEs economic recovery in the post-COVID-19 crisis. Before we start the event, I would like to read the housekeeping rules for all participants. First, please rename yourself to facilitate identification, country, and name. Do not forget to select your language of preference, Russian or English. Kindly type your questions and comments in the Q&A chat. And finally, to intervene, please use a headset and earphones and raise your virtual hand. Very briefly, I would like to quickly invite the participants to click on step number 1 for the renaming, participants icon at the bottom of your window. Step 2, in the participant bar, check your name, click on more button. Step number 3, click on the rename and input the name and then OK. Please rename yourself as country, underline, entity, underline, name, if you want to take floor. So for us, it will be easier to identify yourself. Thank you very much. And with that, we will start the event. First, on the opening remarks, let me welcome the authorities from UNCTAD and UNECE, including our partner institution. Mrs. Tatiana Krylova, Head of Enterprise Branch of UNCTAD, Mrs. Teresa Moreira, Head of Competition and Consumer Policies Branch of UNCTAD, Mr. Mika Vempesalen, I hope I pronounced very well your last name, I'm sorry, Mr. Mika, Chief of Market Access of UNECE, and finally, Mr. Alexei Ivanov, Director, BRICS Competition Policy Center based in Moscow. Please, Mrs. Tatiana Krylova, you have the floor for your opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Спасибо, Пьер. Доброе утро, уважаемые участники конференции. Я рада приветствовать вас на этом важном мероприятии.
Welcome and greet you at this important event organized as part of the implementation of the project, UN project, global initiative of assisting small and medium enterprises after COVID-19. This project is a part of a framework document of the UN on immediate response, social economic response to challenges brought by the COVID-19 pandemics, which explains the conditions or sets out the conditions for the response by the UN aiming to support the countries members of the UN in terms of implementation of projects aiming to address the challenges brought by COVID-19. There are 5 key areas of work within this project which are being implemented nationally within the projects aiming to address the challenges brought by COVID-19. And out of these 5 areas of work, one of the key areas is assistance and support to small and medium enterprises amid the pandemics. The implementation of this project is underlined by, among others, by the gender equality and the environmental dimensions. We aim to develop and implement instruments of technical assistance, both support to the government of the UN member countries and their small and medium enterprises in order to increase the resilience and stability of small and medium enterprises in developed countries and in countries with transitional economies in order to mitigate social and economic consequences of COVID-19. as well as to promote the strengthening of the contribution of the small and medium enterprises to the sustainable development goals. Within this initiative, we work with in close contact with the countries who are coordinating the projects, as well as the UN-ECE and 5 regional commissions in Africa, Europe, Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East. The financing for the project is provided from the Development Fund of the United Nations, and therefore this project is being implemented based on a global approach to project implementation, taking into account at the same time national specifics and the exchange of experience and best practices across the world. This is one of the projects, so one of the 5 projects to support the small and medium enterprises, and it is split into specific clusters which reflect specifics of the small and medium enterprises, including development of business skills, simplification of the system and procedures for incorporation and registration of small and medium enterprise, development of informal business, the improvement of access to financing, and the improvement of financial knowledge by leaders of the small and medium enterprises, access to innovations, and the improvement of access to sales markets. We are here to discuss today the implementation of this 5th cluster. This project is based on the combination of these various components that I've just mentioned, reflecting the multifaceted nature of the small and medium enterprises sector. And it is aimed at not only the improvement of the role and strengthening of the role of the small and medium enterprises in the social economic development of countries, but also to improve the support provided to the small and medium enterprises as a response to COVID-19. And not just responses, but also taking into consideration other factors such as the environmental protection, the need to improve the competitiveness of small and medium enterprises, and the need to improve their resilience to risks, as well as the development of the economy as a whole. So this is what I wanted to say at the beginning of this webinar about the project, and I wish you all a good luck and a fruitful discussion here today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Спасибо, Tatiana. I would like now to invite Mrs. Teresa Moreira to provide the opening remarks from the Competition and Consumer Policy Branch. Mrs. Moreira, you have the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to my colleague, Ms. Tatiana Krylova, for the support it has provided and the cooperation to the Competition and Consumer Policies branch of UNCTAD, implementing this development account COVID-19 related project. I would also like very much to greet, of course, the other fellow colleagues that will do the opening remarks. A warm welcome and thank you also to Mr. Mika Vepsalainen, Chief of Market Access of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, with whom I have had the pleasure of actually starting the cooperation of my branch with UNECE. And finally, also here, Mr. Alexey Ivanov, the director of the BRICS Competition Law and Policy Center, also a partner and a friend of UNCTAD in this particular area. But of course, it is extremely important to greet also all the representatives from competition authorities, from small and medium-sized authorities from this region, all the colleagues that will intervene later. Allow me a special warm welcome and a word of thanks to the representatives of the competition authorities of the Russian Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, Mr. Andrei Tsiganov, to the head of the Kazakhstan Competition Authority, Mr. Zubangarin, and to the head of the Uzbekistan Competition Authority, Mr. Karabayev. I think my colleague already presented the framework for this project. For the Competition and Consumer Policies branch, it has been a very interesting and exciting experience to be a part with, of course, the enterprise branch of UNCTAD and other colleagues of UNCTAD of some projects that the UN launched to respond to COVID-19, to the COVID-19 pandemic impact. And in this case, as it was mentioned, the project seeks to examine how the impact affected small and medium-sized companies in developing countries, and in our concrete stream of work, how competition law and policy can provide support in the economic recovery. So the idea of behind this cluster is to enhance the capacities of policymakers, competition authorities, small and medium-sized companies, bodies, to facilitate their access, the SMEs access to markets already during the pandemic and in the aftermath of this crisis. And of course, this has been a very big challenge for, especially for micro and small and medium-sized companies, due to the disruption of markets worldwide, to the shutdown of companies, to the suspension of normal supply chains, to the decreased demand, and big challenges have been faced by, I think, businesses all over the world, but definitely micro and small and medium-sized companies, especially in some developing countries, have been very severely hit. Allow me to mention just two UNCTAD reports that I think provide, well, interesting data and analysis to this background situation, like other UN agencies and organizations. I will refer them in the chat. One of them refers to the impact of the COVID-19 in trade and development, and was released in November of 2020 and is now being updated because our acting Secretary General wants it to be as a living document, so that it can really be a reference to support member states of UNCTAD in all the areas covered by our very large mandate. And the other publications I wanted to refer is a more recent publication that updates the information on our trade and development report. So you may find useful information there. Now, concretely going back to the project. So we have decided in discussions also, of course, with our partners, the economic commissions of the United Nations, and in close partnership with some colleagues, some competition authorities in this case, from each region, we have produced a report on the impact of MSMEs due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and how competition law and policy could support them, as I mentioned. And this has been complemented by 3 national studies in different continents, one in Asia, in Thailand, another one in Africa, in South Africa, from South Africa, and then another one in Latin America from Brazil. Here, because UNECE also will be sharing a study, we have not really deepened this analysis, but through our partnership with the BRICS Competition Law and Policy Center, which produces very high-level research that is well known internationally, we expect that this partnership can also provide us some inputs for the next steps. And this will be my final mention. We want with this webinar to raise awareness on the competition concerns of MSMEs in the recovery. also to better inform policy responses measures by integrating the specific consideration of MSMEs in competition policy focus. And we hope to hear from the participants and from the member states of UNECE in order to identify key issues that we would like to be subject to further discussions through the remaining months of this project that will should be implemented until the end of this year. So for now, I think this is all I wanted to share with you. I certainly hope we will have a very fruitful discussion. I'm looking forward to hear the reports and the interventions and comments. Of course, the Competition and Consumer Policies branch of UNCTAD stands ready to assist member states and to continue this partnership with UNECE, with the BRICS Competition Law and Policy Center, and of course with the competition authorities and the SMEs bodies representatives that are here with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for your opening remarks. Now let me invite Mr. Mika Vetsalen from the UNECE Chief Market Access. Mika, you have the floor. Thank you.
Доброе утро, уважаемые участники. От имени экономической комиссии.
Yes, good morning, dear participants. On behalf of UNECE, I would like to welcome you at this webinar. I would like to also thank the UNCTAD colleagues for a fantastic organization of this event.
The policy messages that emerge from the COVID-19 survey-based impact assessments that we in the UNECE are carrying out under the trade program as part of the UN-wide system SME surge effort. This work delivers whole of government approaches to enable governments to increase the contribution of trade to post-COVID-19 recovery, along with tangible tools for supporting SMEs recovery and development. The assessments are based on the premise that any attempt to assess the impact of COVID-19 must proceed from a clear understanding of the development challenges that occupy the government's agendas at the eve of the pandemic and ground the analysis in the context of economic vulnerability. For if there's one lesson to draw from previous development experiences, it would be that the disasters aggravate deep-seated structural weaknesses. Without an understanding of such weaknesses, relief and development efforts might miss the target. Our assessments show how trade and particularly non-tariff measures could be leveraged to supporting structural transformation in countries, and they feature action-oriented recommendations that we always then agree upon with the respective governments. We shall be sharing these findings with you today, focusing on key messages pertaining to improving market access conditions facing MSMEs. We shall also highlight avenues for strengthening synergies between NTM reforms and competition policy. This is an area that Teresa already mentioned. We have been working for quite some time with colleagues in UNCTAD. We are very pleased with this cooperation and look forward to further work in this area. Let me wish you a very fruitful discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mika. And I would like now to invite Mr. Alexey Ivanov, Director of the BRICS Competition Center in Moscow. Alexey, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much, Pierre, and it's a pleasure to join such important, global institutions in providing some sort of meaningful advice and insights for our small and medium-sized businesses in the CIS region, because it's terribly important, especially these days, for these guys to survive. As you know, CIS our former Soviet republic, they went through transition from a command and control administrative economy centrally planned in relatively short period of time. So small and medium-sized entrepreneurs is relatively new concept here. And this kind of new phenomenon, which was relatively recently created, was severely hit by COVID pandemic. And in the background note we provided for this dialogue, for this regional dialogue, we are actually showing that this particular segment of the economy of the region was probably most severely impacted by the COVID pandemic. And the reason is not only in the general fragility of this sector of the economy, but also in those structural changes which are happening in the global economy as well, digitalization. We call it. And this digitalization and platformization and building of large ecosystems where the major part of the global wealth is actually now residing has another quite significant implication for development of SME sector, and especially in developing countries, which are CIS mainly presenting. And in the background note, we are thinking on how competition authorities can actually help and facilitate, enable small and medium-sized entrepreneurs in this particular context. According to McKinsey report, in 2025, we are going to have more than a third of the global value residing in the networks of just few global digital platforms. And that's quite actually worrying consequence of the development of the digital economy and digitalization in general. We have to be concerned on how these small and medium-sized entrepreneurs are going to survive in this new, basically centrally command and planned economy. Because in the central planned economy, in the economy of control and command, entrepreneurship is relatively weak in general, because you don't need entrepreneurs. You need more like effective labor and executors of those commands. So it's kind of ghost plan, system where you're planning and then implementing your decisions. And in the digital economy, we think many smaller but still quite powerful ghost plans arising in the form of these digital platforms. We have new form of ghost plan 2.0 actually taking place in this new circumstance of the digital economy. And within this digitally planned and controlled ecosystems, we don't have so much space for development of small and medium-sized entrepreneurs. And you see this Uberization where Uber drivers becoming more like extended labor rather than entrepreneurs themselves, freelancers doing some sort of riding services, providing them to customers. We see same transformation happening in many other areas, from agriculture, where we have same type of impact of digitalization processes, to retail, to financial services. Everywhere we have massive ecosystems taking over. And pandemic, unfortunately, only accelerated this process, which is pretty worrying outcome of the pandemic itself, but also of the attitude, policy attitude to these processes on the side of the authorities. And I really have a hope that with the attention of such powerful institutions at United Nations organizations present here and competition authorities from the region, we can somehow, if not revert this process, but at least think it over and maybe come up with certain, policy solutions which would enable small and medium-sized enterprise just to not maybe to succeed in the new technological framework, but or new form of economic order which is created by digitalization, but at least to survive. And I think it's a very important imperative which should drive and define the policy approach by the competition authorities nowadays. We hear in all major jurisdictions there is a discussion about reset of antitrust policy, about revival of antitrust policy in the age of digitalization. But if we take in mind, if we think more about small and medium-sized entrepreneurs in this context, it's not just a reset, it's quite a serious change in policy approach. That's what's required. And I hope that this type of regional dialogues, because I know that UNCTAD is promoting this type of conversations around the globe, not only focusing on CIS region, I hope that this type of regional dialogues would help to encourage competition authorities to implement and enforce competition laws in much broader sense, and make them much more inclusive, and actually target these bottlenecks created by digital giants. So thank you everyone who joined the dialogue. I hope we would have a fruitful conversation and really would have some time for Q&A session, I think, because it's very important. We would not just continue to set of presentations, but also to a very interactive discussion. And thanks again to Pierre and Teresa and Tatiana and Mike to getting us on board. We are really happy to be part of this discussion and this interactive exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And the note, I think background note is published, yeah? Is it right? It should be published on the website, available for panelists and attendees, yeah.
Thank you very much, Alexei. And yes, let me remind all the registered participants that we are putting to all participants the report of this event. I think that we have seen some comments in the chat from participants asking for the documents on everything that we have. I think we have already put much information on our websites, but we will put also the report of this event as it goes by now in this webinar. So I thank very much the opening remarks from everybody. And now we will start with the presentation of the second segment. And we are exactly on time because we said 10:30 and we are 10:29 now. So thank you very much, everybody. And we will now invite our colleagues for the next session to go into the presentation of, first of all, Mrs. Rachel Burks, UNCTAD consultant, and Mrs. Hannah Daoudi, an UNECE officer. I will just invite now the speakers to go to this session. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be attending this event this evening. It's evening in Brisbane. I know it's morning in Europe, so good evening from Australia. I will just share my screen here. Thank you very much to UNCTAD for the invitation to present the findings of this global report. I have a limited time this evening, so want to focus very much picking up on a lot of those issues that Alexei has mentioned in his opening address there, looking at the competition issues that have arisen for MSMEs during the COVID pandemic, and then looking at how competition agencies and authorities around the world have so far responded to those issues that have arisen, looking at some global trends that have emerged, and finally thinking about some recommendations for future action required by competition authorities and policymakers. So if I may start with identifying the issues that have arisen, and the first one is the one that Alexei has just mentioned in detail. We have seen an emergence of, a real flux of MSMEs moving to the digital market, a need to go online in order to survive through the pandemic. That has not been easy for MSMEs in many cases. It relies on strong internet connections and the like, which are not always available, particularly in developing or transitioning economies. What we were talking about before the pandemic started in competition antitrust terms was how we manage the digital giants. And that conversation has obviously been highlighted during the pandemic, where with even more businesses moving online, with more activity happening online, the dominance of those companies is increasing. It's not decreasing, it's increasing. So that's certainly an issue that has come through during the pandemic. We have seen a lot of collaboration during the pandemic, collaboration that perhaps would not have happened without the pandemic, certainly. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail about that in a minute, about the responses of the competition authorities to that collaboration that has been needed, frankly, to ensure security of supply and access to essential goods and services throughout the pandemic period. One of the issues that's also relevant for discussion now, and actually more so as we come out of the pandemic, I think, is this question of failing firms. So we've seen a lot of businesses that haven't been able to survive the pandemic period. I think we will continue to see that as government support in many jurisdictions around the world starts to ease. That will be the real test for how many businesses are able to survive the full pandemic experience. And this question of whether mergers will be permitted in circumstances where firms are failing. We may see more mergers coming through, and we may see a heavier reliance on the failing firm defence to allow more mergers to come through. And this certainly has the potential to have a big impact on MSMEs who maybe tried to be purchased and swept in under a larger umbrellas. Around the world, we've seen many instances of price gouging, or at least the accusation of price gouging. Some jurisdictions have the ability to address price gouging through their abuse of dominance provisions, whilst others have dealt with it through price monitoring type of legislation. Which has allowed, often that price monitoring legislation actually was in place before the pandemic. So it allowed the competition agencies actually to maintain that monitoring of pricing of essential goods and services throughout the period, which has had a good effect for those jurisdictions. And the final main issue that we've observed, or that I think we need to be mindful of going forward, is the question of ensuring this ongoing level playing field. We all know that that's what competition policy is trying to achieve, but the government support that is being provided may have had the impact of, unleveling the playing field, if you like. So we do need to keep a mind or an eye on what the impact of the government support may have had for competition in various sectors, and what impact that may have had on the MSME community. In terms of how competition authorities have responded, I mentioned the approval of coordinated activity. This has really been quite widespread around the world. A coordination, a collaboration that was required to ensure continuity of supply, especially in relation to essential goods and services, has been approved. Often it is subject to time constraints, time limited, and this is something that will need to be undone as we come to the end of the pandemic period. Around the world, this has been handled in various different ways. I've mentioned some of them there on the slide. Some jurisdictions have been very open and transparent and published guidelines on what is and isn't permitted from a collaboration point of view, which gives very clear guidance to everyone, including MSMEs. Some of the jurisdictions have gone back to allowing much more in the way of informal guidance. The US and Europe came out very quickly and said that they would support discussions with businesses wishing to collaborate. The UK has passed a statutory exclusion for groceries. Australia had in existence an authorisation process, which it used very quickly in our jurisdiction. And some of the smaller jurisdictions, Fiji as an example that I'll give here, engaged in a communication approach where they widened their communication to make it clear to businesses and to consumers, more importantly, what it was they could expect to see and what they should be concerned about during the pandemic period. we have seen, by way of global trend, a lot more competition authorities and policymakers working together with MSMEs, which is MSME communities, MSME associations. So that's something we would obviously like to see encouraged. So in terms of recommendations for recovery, we now have an opportunity, I think, to consider whether the competition policy objectives, which tend to focus very much on consumer welfare, whether they should be interpreted now to allow for broader economic objectives, so that we can take considerations of MSMEs into account more broadly. As I mentioned, we are going to need to start lifting the exemptions from competition law that have been put in place, and as quickly as possible to minimize the impact on markets going forward. Some jurisdictions around the world impose or allow thresholds or safe harbors or even exemptions for MSMEs. Jurisdictions that don't have that ability may wish to think about allowing that to give MSMEs some more security around competition law application. Some jurisdictions allow MSMEs to work together in a collective bargaining way, and that may be something that is needed to allow MSMEs to collaborate themselves to survive to recover from the pandemic. Clear guidance from competition authorities for MSMEs will clearly be very helpful. Rethinking any of those financial support schemes for MSMEs and engaging with the informal sector of MSMEs will be key to understanding that sector. And perhaps the final point, which is coming back to the one I started on and the one that Alexei has highlighted already, is understanding how those digital market structures are impacting MSMEs and the policy responses required to address that. I will leave it at that. Thank you very much, Pierre. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for your brief presentation, which is exactly 10 minutes, which I appreciate that very much because of the time that we have constrained. I would like, without further ado, to invite my dear colleague, Mrs. Hannah Daoudi from UNECE, to present her presentation as well. Hannah, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Hannah.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be sharing my screen. So, can everybody see the screen?
Yes, but we don't see you anymore.
It's okay. Basically, what I'm going to today I'm going to, first of all, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share the results of our assessments with you. So today I'm going to share with you the results of the assessments, and basically these assessments were undertaken as part of the SME search efforts. We have two types of assessments. There is one type of assessment where we focused on SMEs. So we interviewed around 2,000 MSMEs from 5 countries, which are listed. And what we tried to do is trying to see how the non-tariff measures that were deployed by the government to curb the supply chain disruptions caused by COVID actually affected the SMEs. So we looked also into the SME scoping strategies, and we tried to trace the ripple effects of these scoping strategies and the crisis in general. Now that was one element, and all of them were survey-based, and the surveys were pilot tested, and they were conducted and undertaken by enterprise support institutions. There is a huge, large generations of very powerful enterprise support institutions in each of the countries, and their help and support was very critical because they're aware of the problems of the SMEs, and all of them are working closely with the government in order to make sure that the needs of the SMEs are properly addressed through tailor-made solutions as opposed to one-size-fits-all solutions. We had another area, which is basically in Central Asia. We looked into how the non-tariff measures, again, specifically trade facilitation, because NTMs include also trade facilitation, TBT. So here we only looked at trade facilitation measures and how they affected trade patterns and what are the implications for the SMEs. So I'm going to go quickly and try to elaborate what we mean. So by trade facilitation measures, the questionnaires looked into all the processes that SMEs undertake in order to export and import. So from the moment they start preparing the documents to the moment they arrange for transport and pass customs. And this is what you see in front of you is a UN-CFACT model, which is basically housed within UN-ECE. And UN-CFACT is the group of experts that have been developing recommendations on trade facilitation and digitalized standards. For example, the code bar that is used until today was developed by CFACT. So this is one area that was covered. The other area that was covered is basically the issue of conformity assessment and quality control. And as you can see, the questionnaire looked into the issues arising from standards implementation, the issue of conformity assessment. You know, when traders have to import, they have to ensure that the product conforms to standard, the same thing to conform to regulatory requirements, the same thing when they export. So these certificates are critical. And of course, the market surveillance is what happened when the product is placed on the market. How did all these issues and the measures taken by the government impacted the SMEs? And how did these measures, what was the interplay with lockdown measures and safe and healthy health safety measures that were implemented at the borders? How did all this affect SMEs export and import activities? And how did this affect their productive capacity? So basically, this is exactly that. These are the issues that we looked into. Now, just one quick remark is when it comes to what the government did, of course, there were the lockdown measures. We all know that. Otherwise, they, of course, limited any trade restrictions to the minimum, and all of them were temporary. Most of them were done at the very early stages to hedge against supply shortages, specifically food and PPE equipment. Every country that was surveyed, they tried to upgrade and increase and intensify trade facilitation measures. I'll talk about that later. And of course, what they did is also temporary exemptions of customs duties in order to release the financial burden. Of course, these are the NTMs. Of course, each government had a huge amount of relief packages, which I'll speak about later. For now, I just want to focus on the NTMs. So I'm going to give you one example of trade facilitation measures, which was used to the full extent possible. And the experience that stands out is the experience of Georgia. Georgia used every single trade facilitation measure. Georgia already had these in place, but they upscaled them. So when it comes to issues of online submission, they increased the outlets for and the websites for publishing online material, online changes online. They had the call centers 24 hours. Then, of course, the trade documents were all electronic at the border control, continued to be risk-based. They did not start, opening and doing physical control. So everything they made, everything in order to make, ensure the smooth flow of all exports and imports. You see how they changed the physical inspection in order to make it even more efficient. And of course, the tax payments were also online. Transit traffic continued to be based on all these international agreements. And these are very important. What Georgia did is basically they relied upon them. Of course, every country that was surveyed had these conventions and agreements, and they were very important. For example, in the case of Serbia, they had the Green Corridor, which they had with CEFTA, which became extremely important for COVID. So you could see each country already was very keen on using NTMs in order to trade facilitation measures. Now, what happened? This slide here, I'm sorry, it's crowded, but let me try to, sorry. Oh, let me go back. So this slide here shows the key findings. I'm going to tell you the key findings in a nutshell, because this is, if you want, the storyline. Each country has a specific conditions, but these are the common issues. So what happens is that at one point, NTMs became a barrier. Why? Because there were still in some countries incomplete reforms. So what happened is that COVID happened while they were still trying to move, for example, to a paperless trading environment. Some of them did not complete all the reforms in order to make sure that the physical inspection at the borders flow smoothly. So all of these issues meant that, of course, increased time, waiting lines, and so on and so forth. Then, of course, there were the issues of connectivity in some countries, lack of adequate transport infrastructure. I'll speak more about that. There was also the issue of the burdensome transit trade arrangements in terms of the permits. So all of these were an issue, but they were aggravated during the COVID, their impact, because the government could not do anything, could not invest and continue its investment in the long-term issues. And it was very difficult to change the transit transport arrangements. Now, what happened is that all of these issues meant that the impact was very strong, came through supply shortages, because in addition to all of these issues at the border, the long queues, there was also the partner countries. There was a huge problem with EU countries, for example. They kept on changing the safety measures at the border, the special arrangements, and they were not clear. And some requirements were really too demanding. Then there was border closures. All of these issues meant delays and so on and so forth. The monetary policy, which is some countries had to devalue, example, Moldova, and what happened is that imports became more expensive. So if you look at the arrow, the immediate thing is that the supply shortages combined with dwindling international demand, because every country was affected. So I'm highlighting Moldova because Moldova, the main trade partners is Romania, and you can see the SMEs said, we lost our trade partners in Romania. So what happens is that the SMEs effectively lost their main buyers, because these buyers were closed or temporarily simply ceased to exist. Now, having said that, the SMEs were very dynamic, and each country shows the dynamism of the enterprise sector. You have entrepreneurs they define what is entrepreneurs. They were able to use all the tools available to withstand the supply chain disruptions. For example, in Armenia, of course, all of them had, but I'm singling out Armenia because they tried to renegotiate the sales contracts. They tried to they preempted that there is this going to happen, so they were shipping before the lockdown measures. So you could see that around 60% were able to maintain exports, to regain the pre-pandemic export level when the lockdown was achieved. However, the problem is that they are unable to maintain operations, let alone exports, because of what is on the point, the arrow that is in the blue, showing that what happened is that because they had these falling demand, they had to cope. So what they did, they had to rely on to reduce the payments. They had to delay payments, and some of them even started using their personal savings at the expense of their households' welfare. So
Anna, we have to wrap up.
Yes. So what happened is that they were closely in debt. In the case of Georgia, what happened is that the maritime shipping lines started beefing up the prices. So they strangled the SMEs. As you can see, the SMEs had to go and use the online road transport, and the road transport was very problematic. So what happened is that the governments, again, they had relief measures, they had targeted schemes, loan schemes, but the long-term development efforts took the back seat. So of course, they need to link relief to development. And one example that stands out is in the case of Armenia, they made sure that the loans target help SMEs also developed, and the forwarders were able to develop new solutions. I want to go to this slide, which is very important. What we are trying to say here is that you have the
Anna, if you can wrap up, please. Thank you.
We have the competition issues, and then we have the NTMs. What I'm trying to show through this slide is that there is a lot of room for complementarity between NTMs and the competition policy, in the sense that NTMs can be used in order to avoid using a restrictive competition policy. They are listed there. For example, trade facilitation measures and market surveillance can be used to avoid safeguards and anti-dumping measures. And this is a little bit of what we do to help SMEs as UNECE. And of course, I leave you with the links for the impact assessment, and I leave you with the link for the Central Asia report. And the SME assessments will be published progressively. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for your presentation. And of course, this presentation will be available to all participants of this important conference. Now, let me go directly to the next panel. We have put together a great amount of speakers, which we will be able to share the experiences on these topics. The session will comprise 2 panels with 5 to 8 minute presentations per speaker, and then we will have 10 to 15 minutes open for floor discussion. I would like to kindly remind the speakers to stick to the time, so then we will allow for more active participation of all the speakers and also the participants. First of all, let me present the panel discussants. First of all, we have the heads of very important competition authorities of the CIS region, Mr. Alexei Tsiganov, Deputy Head of the Russian Federal Anti-Monopoly Service. Welcome very much for this conference. Andrei, thank you very much for being with us. Of course, Mr. Serik Sumangarin, Head of the Kazakhstan Competition Authority. Welcome, Serik, for your time. And Mr. Faruk Karavev, Head of the Uzbekistan Competition Authority. Thank you very much as well for being with us. In addition, we also have invited representatives from SMEs agencies throughout the CIS and UNECE membership. First of all, let me welcome Mrs. Tatiana Estrohova, Coordinator, Western Balkan Chamber Investment Forum. Welcome, Tatiana, for your time. Second, Mrs. Nosigul Kuzkastova, Expert ex-Central Asia Partnership on Trade Logistics and Trade Transport and Logistics. Welcome, Mrs. Nosigul. I hope you are there connected with us.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Third, Mr. Revas Topuria, co-founder, Center for Economic Prosperity, Georgia. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Revas. Fourth, Mr. Vojan Stanik, Deputy Director, Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Serbia. Thank you very much, Mr. Vojan, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Then we have Mr. Gevorok Voskosyan. Sorry about this.
Fogosyan.
Yes, Fogosyan. Head of Business Support Office, Armenia. Thank you very much, Mr. George.
Thank you for the invitation.
Then we have Mr. Viseles Stevert, Director, Private Sector.
Vyacheslav
Starbets, yes. Where are you now? I don't see you, but you might be somewhere there. I cannot see you, but thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Veselevs, Director, Private Sector for Moldova. And finally, but not least, of course, Mrs. Aisilu Mamsketsatieva, my goodness, SMEs and trade expert, SMEs representative from Kyrgyz Republic. Thank you very much. I think you were with us earlier. I hope you are there connected. Thank you very much for being with us.
I'm still here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So as you can see, we have a great amount of speakers today. So let me remind you the timing. So I will unfortunately have to remind you, if you go a little bit beyond, I will give you some lines when you have 1 minute, I will interrupt you, and please bear with me and indulge us for this, particularly for those that will be speaking in Russian. Kindly allow me for these interruptions. So we have panel 1. Question number 1. How did non-tariff measures implemented by governments to curb the spread of COVID-19 affect micro and small medium enterprises' trade and supply chain activities? What can be done to increase the contribution of NTMs to improve micro and small medium enterprise market access and recovery? And what will be the role of competition policy? So this is a huge question. I hope we can dissect it, and I think we will have different people responding to this question. I would like first to invite the representative from Georgia, Mr. Rebas, for 5 minutes. And I would like to, if you can stick to your minutes, will be great. And you have the floor.
Sure. Hello. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I'll share my screen. I hope you all see it and you can hear me well. I try to stick with the time.
Please.
Yeah. So before I go there, I have to mention the whole framework and regulatory background of Georgia, right? As it was mentioned, yes, we're a post-Soviet country, but I have to admit that Georgia has a great trade regulatory framework, as we have free trade agreements with more than 2.3 billion market, and we can have our products shipped there without any customs duties. We have GSP agreements, US, Canada, Japan, ongoing FTA negotiations with India, South Korea, Israel, and in general, the whole business environment in Georgia is doing quite great. As you can look in the ease of doing business rankings, Georgia is #2 in starting business. It's #5 in registering a property, and all the international rankings are looking quite good. And the government is doing its best in order to help MSMEs and make their life easier with all the services there are, with all the e-commerce platforms, and basically everything MSMEs need to do with the government bureaucracy. They can do it online, as it was mentioned before. And we can proudly say that Georgia is compliant with 93% of the WTO's administrative agreement on trade facilitation. Now, when it comes to our key findings, and back to the questions which was asked before, I have to say that I have to once again highlight that even though the government is it has done everything they can, and all the MSMEs which we have surveyed, and we surveyed around 330 MSMEs in Georgia from different sectors, and all of them were abreast of applied trade regulations and procedures, and there are only 2 instances of increased clearance times that were reported. All border crossing points were properly managed. However, despite all these actions by the government, the trade facilitation efficiency gains were still undermined by transport disruptions in other countries, in our partner countries, which we could not control, of course. Therefore, I would like to mention a couple of numbers. Around 27% scaled down their production, another 11% suspended production altogether, and MSMEs that maintained production faced efficiency losses. In addition, only 10% of MSMEs repurposed their production. Several were forced to abandon the repurposing due to the fierce import competition, and only 17% of MSMEs surveyed increased their engagement in e-commerce. And I think there is room to do more in there. So in general, despite the government's sweeping financial support measures, the majority of MSMEs surveyed were in debt and postponed their business expenditures and loan repayments to cope with the falling revenues. And I would like to highlight two sectors: manufacturing MSMEs and farmers. When it comes to manufacturing MSMEs, there was a shortage of raw material and machinery equipment due to the transport disruptions which were mentioned earlier. And it resulted in reduced production activities of the international suppliers. There was also dwindling demand, which was mentioned before. Therefore, around 32% were unable to afford increased transport costs, and the segment included not only micro and small enterprises, but the medium ones as well. There was clear discrepancies in the export earnings of this segment and remaining MSMEs that were able to afford transportation costs following the lifting of national lockdowns. And you can see in this graph that those who were not able to afford this high cost, almost more than 40% of them had to cease the exports altogether. When it comes to farmers, their food shortages aggravated due to the shift towards road transport, as the maritime transport was very expensive in this period, as it was previously mentioned. This caused delays in inbound freight and making wastage, acute shortages in, among others, seedling and animal feed. Food shortages were also caused by export bans in partner countries, and particularly on wheat, and the breakdown of communication with suppliers. And in general, 45% of farmers had to suspend their export activities, as you can see in this picture. And the issue, as explained by the farmers, was that is high degree of financial risks that export activities had in this period. Those conditions of uncertainty surrounding lockdowns in partner countries made it difficult to guarantee that the consignments would reach their destination damage-free, and the buyers would not charge the late delivery penalties. And the last slide, I hope I'm doing okay with the time. Last
30 seconds, please. Thank you.
Yeah, two points to underline. Key emergency needs there and key long-term needs. When key emergency needs are financial kind, enterprise support and competition issues. MSMEs are struggling with their bank loan repayment. They're experiencing shortages in working capital. They're experiencing lacking disaster risk management. They face prohibitive maritime transport costs. They're facing prohibitive, all of these then translate in additional problems. And there are a couple long-term needs which could be addressed. First of all, development, transport development, further development of national railway network, so it's less dependent on transport by trucks, productive capacity development. So now MSMEs become more comply with regulatory requirements in regional global markets. And competition issues, as MSMEs reported that slightest increase in production costs automatically translate into reduced market shares since Georgia is flooded with a cheaper and counterfeit product. So that are the main issues I wanted to underline. Of course, I would be happy to answer any further questions, and we're very actively involved in at Center of Economic Prosperity in Georgia. We're very actively involved in surveys like that, FTAs, trade facilitation measures. So you can also view our website, cep.g, and any questions there, you can either ask here or email us on this email. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for sticking to the time. Now we move to the competition authority side, from the competition side. So now I have here three distinguished heads of authorities. Let me first start with Mr. Serik Sumangarin, who is currently not necessarily in Kazakhstan, but I'm happy to see that he's still with us virtually in the world of this COVID-19. Serik Sumangarin, you have the floor.
Спасибо большое, Пьер. Но, как вы знаете, до этого...
Yes, thank you very much, Pierre. As you know, I was head of the anti-monopoly service of the IS, a union of 5 states. And the key objectives we managed to address in that organization is to stop in the tracks the nascent national protectionism. This was a very important achievement. I've been in the area of supporting or in the business of supporting SMEs for more than 15 years now, and I have a very good understanding that their business is the cornerstone of the economy. We always thought that they are resilient, rather resilient to varying economic trends. However, now we have seen during this pandemic that in the long run and in specific situations, they're not resilient enough. This is due to their structural issues with their inability of building significant and maintaining significant stocks. you know, we see very clearly all the challenges they're facing. In Kazakhstan, we have a national fund financed from the trade in raw materials by the country. This fund is implementing a number of anti-crisis measures, such as statutory exemptions, tax breaks, income tax breaks, tax reduction of up to 80% for those trading in essential goods and foods. We have adopted a roadmap for the development of small and medium enterprises in the country. We, under this roadmap, we increase the average loan provided, the amount of the average loan provided to small and medium enterprises to $60,000. Totaling $3.6 million US dollars in loans provided to them. So we are implementing a set of measures, and despite that, we see the number of the small and medium enterprises in our country falling. This is due to a number of various paradigms within our body. We're always aiming to promote development of small and medium enterprises, and we always believe the more SMEs we have in our country, the better. However, we now see that they need structural support as well, including from the side of the on the side of the competition policy. They need help, assistance, and protection, including from takeovers and so on. It's very important to maintain a favorable environment for the small and medium enterprises. And obviously now we've seen that borders shut when export operations hampered. They are in a very difficult situation, and the support measures are extremely important. In this connection, we have established an agency for, and actually our competition body is called the Agency for the Promotion of Competition Policy and Improvement of Competition Policy. At the outset, we adopted the so-called transparency declaration or declaration on transparency, and we've said to the business community that we will be a transparent organization. Yes, we have we will be implementing the antitrust measures, but at the same time we will remain very transparent to business, and we're always open to cooperation. Kazakhstan is split into 17 regions, and in each region we established the councils on trade barriers, and each is composed of representatives of the business community, and they get together to discuss the barriers existing in their operations. The head of state is supporting us, and for the first time in the history of Kazakhstan, a decree was adopted on further measures to support development of competition in the country, and all the executive bodies in the parliament have worked on the text and are cooperating in this area. We are facing a situation where we have a very high inflation rates. Prices are up for all the essential goods, for fuels, for real estate, and this is in a way a response to the lack of working capital. And therefore, all the efforts of our governments are now focused in this area. In order to support business, the business community in this environment and this situation, they need to have access to long-term and cheap funding. Unfortunately, we're seeing now that until the end of this year, until the vaccination is complete, things will not improve significantly for the better in the markets. However, we have a project or a program for the development of competition until 2025. There are two key areas within this competition development project. First of all, it aims at assisting small and medium enterprises at development in developing their production capacity, improving their access to raw materials, improving their access to funding, improving their access to the transport sector, to the railroads, to the national railroads, in particular, access to cables, to telecommunications. Another important aspect is elimination of barriers to trade. We have adopted about 25 initiatives in this area, and we continue to work towards elimination of the existing barriers. We see that our anti-monopoly body and competition authority should be and should play, first of all, the role of promoter of the favorable environment for the small and medium enterprises. We believe, and I'm confident that by 2025 we will be able to establish simplified and strong mechanisms that will underlie the operation of small and medium enterprises in our country. We are aiming also at package solutions to help our small and medium enterprises. We need to motivate them, but we also need to create the necessary preconditions for the small and medium businesses and enable them to operate transparently and efficiently. We're also looking at the simplification of legislative requirements for small and medium enterprises and at promotion of healthy competition between small and medium enterprises and bigger enterprises. Also, like in Georgia, we also pay particular attention to the development of a healthy business environment in the country. We rank 25th in the doing business rating right now, and we are aiming to improve our position in this ranking. Unfortunately, the time is limited. I will not be able to tell you everything and cover all the areas. However, within rather a short period of time, we have managed to help small and medium enterprises. Their activity allowed to reduce by 2 times the price for COVID tests, for example. Also reduce the price of treatments for COVID. This has been done by small and medium enterprises with the support from our body. Thank you very much. Since the time is limited, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Spasiba. Yes, there's a lot to actually share from the perspective of the competition authorities. And now let me begin to also continue with the presentation of the Russian Competition Authority, Mr. Andrei Tsiganov. Andrei, you have the floor. I hope you can also use your minutes. Thank you very much.
Спасибо. Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Рад вас всех видеть сегодня.
Yes. Good morning, dear colleagues. I am very happy to see you here today, and thank you. I would like to thank the other speakers for sharing their stories. Obviously, we are in an unprecedented situation, and the small and medium enterprises are facing a recession since 2020. Unfortunately, the sound is not optimal. The interpreter is doing what he can. We are aiming to provide support to our small and medium enterprises. Obviously, the situation is dire. The trends that we have seen during COVID were extremely negative.
Excuse me, Andrei, we have problems with your audio. Perhaps your IT contact, IT unit can help you because we cannot hear you very well. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Что здесь можно делать?
Сейчас я позвоню Саше Рычку.
Так лучше?
It's a little bit.
Is it any better now?
Maybe if you can go a little bit away from the computer, that would be best. Yes, thank you. Go ahead. Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes, thank you very much. Go ahead.
Я продолжу. Я хочу сказать, что одновременно с проблемами...
I will try to continue. Well, at the same time, we are seeing new opportunities for small and medium enterprises. We have been developing a system for unfortunately, the sound is really very bad. It's impossible to do the translation with this quality.
Excuse me, Andrei, we still have problems with your audio. The translators and the interpreters cannot do their job. Maybe if I can give some minutes in order for your IT unit to repair that microphone audio. And while you do that, I'll give the floor to the head of the Uzbekistan Competition Authority, because it is impossible for us to listen to you for your audio.
My idea is to postpone my presentation, yes, and to give the floor to somebody else.
Yeah, it is too strong, so it needs to be, maybe if you can use a headphone, that would be great. We don't hear you very well. Excuse me, great. If we can, your IT unit can help you to organize that. In the meantime, I would like to give the floor to the head of the Uzbekistan Competition Authority, Mr. Karabek. Please, you have the floor. Thank you very much. 5 minutes, please, if you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pierre. It's a pleasure to speak in this very important event. And I would like to share some slides, what we do in Uzbekistan, what the government do, what our committee do. So, well, so far there was enacted about 20 presidential decrees, and the total support package worth about $6 billion US, and it covers about 400,000 businesses and 10 million consumers. And the main support measures are tax vacation reliefs, credit deferrals, interest-free loans, transport subsidies for exporters, funds for wages of employed workers, and of course, infrastructure projects in the regions. And in the first stage, there was, especially for business entities and SMEs, there was provided guarantees and compensations for interest rates of loans, and they implemented infrastructure projects worth about almost $500 million, and the granted free interest budget loans for enterprises, for loan redemptions, compensation of transportation costs for exporters, reimbursement of interest payments for agricultural clusters. And all, especially the support measures for SMEs, tax and customs benefits, loan deferrals, a moratorium on initiation of bankruptcy procedures and tax audit, granting a loan for SMEs, effects on resuming the activity of more than 16 manufacturing enterprises and creation of almost 100,000 new jobs by SMEs. Also, you can see the another package of support that the president and the government has initiated, and this is really impressive because, for example, the most affected industries such as air carriers, travel companies, hotels are exempted from paying the tax on property and land, while reducing the social tax rate from 12% to 1%. So also there was reliefs on mandatory prepayment for gas and electricity for SMEs of to 30%. And there was measures to expand the access of SMEs to the public procurement through implementing introducing the e-procurement systems. And now we have 4 platforms, open platforms that SMEs can join and participate in public procurement procedures. Well, in 2020, the total volume of public procurement through competitive bidding process was about $4 billion, and 20% of this procurement was done by the e-procurement, fulfilled by through e-procurement, and 33,000 of this is the number of SMEs and business entities that have granted the access to public procurement. So our committee also participated in this anti-crisis measures, in implementing these anti-crisis measures. So far, we have done competition protection, consumer right protections and advocacy, and drafting the regional competition development programs. So for this significant consumer goods, 30 type of consumer goods, we have initiated actions against price gouging, and we have revealed about more than 3,000 anti-competitive and abusive actions, including the price gouging, and $16 million reimbursed to the business entities. And also we have done the impact assessment of legal acts, and
it will be great.
You can see these many actions that we have done, and also we have submitted the proposals to abolish about 97 types of licenses and permits to grant access to the SMEs, to the free access to the markets. And you can see, and also what we do for the non-tariff barrier, to remove the non-tariff barriers. We proposed to remove the non-tariff barriers for 5 types of products, including cement, masks, and protective products during the pandemic. And it was realized, and also the service time practice was canceled of a railway company, which has monopoly in the market for exporters. So this is what we done last year, and also as a response, we expand the number of types of monopoly and highly liquid products, which is sold on the commodities exchange. As in, we are the government body that responsible for licensing the commodities exchange. And also we have proposed the state intervention mechanism, where the fluctuations in price are very big, to avoid the price shocks.
Mr. Karabev, wrap up, please.
And the last one thing that I want to state, that Of course, we have a dilemma while implementing the competition policy, the competitive neutrality, the crisis curtail, so-called crisis curtail, adapting public procurement rules to crisis challenges. So here are the possible solutions. So you can see, and due to the time limits, I couldn't list all measures. But what is most effective that support measures should be limited in time and transparent and foreseeable. And anti-price gouging measures should be focused on making market interventions rather than to increase supply rather than price control and regulations. So thank you, and I will happy to answer all your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karabev, for your presentation. Now let's try again the presentation of the Deputy Head of the Russian Competition Authority, Mr. Tsiganov. Mr. Tsiganov, you have the floor.
Спасибо, thank you very much. It's okay now?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Прекрасно. Я хотел бы продолжить свое выступление.
Yes, I would like to continue my presentation, and I wanted to say, first of all, that the environment, the global economic environment due to COVID-19 in 2020, it is unfavorable, obviously, for the business. However, it also creates opportunities for certain small and medium enterprises in specific sectors, and a number of sectors of the Russian economy benefit from the activity of small and medium enterprises, and there was no catastrophic deterioration in those sectors. In our policies, the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service of Russia understands and acknowledges the important role small and medium enterprises play in the economy, in innovation, in contribution to the economic growth of the country. This is not just our position. This is a position that is actually enshrined in the national strategy for the development of small and medium enterprises, as approved by the President of the Russian Federation. The Federal Anti-Monopoly Service of the Russian Federation in 2020 focused on addressing the challenges in the area of competition due to COVID-19, and which triggered significant price volatility, especially in the segment of essential goods. We're not talking only about medicines, but also about foods. And here, I would like to say that with the active participation of the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, virtually during simply one weekend, we managed to subdue the panic buying and to calm our population. We obviously continue to our work in terms of advocacy of the competition. We continue to work together in close cooperation with the Ministry of Agriculture of the Russian Federation. But in any case, shortages and the pricing issues are due not to the fact that some companies are monopolies on the market. No, the reasons were different. And we tried in our work to use the so-called soft measures. We contacted companies, we warned them, we asked them not to engage in price gouging. And those soft measures have been very helpful throughout the crisis. You know, we basically say to the business community, you can't thrive and you can't benefit from the suffering of the population during the crisis. And they're listening to us. And they do take that into consideration. The system for providing support to small and medium enterprises in the Russian Federation was created in the 1990s, and back then the anti-monopoly service already back then was providing support to small and medium enterprises, and therefore this is not something new for us.
Even prior to the lockdown and the general economic downturn, we have had a national project on MSC support approved, including the involvement of key banking institutions, which specifically are tailored to provide financial support to MSE. But as has been rightly said, that small businesses cannot survive through bad times if these bad times last for a very long time. So it was crucial to take timely measures to support directly and indirectly small businesses. Our service in March of last year have established a moratorium on audits or various inspections, except cases where fraud is suspected. We've also introduced measures of deferred fines payments, blanket measures for all enterprises and companies, regardless of their size. We have introduced measures concerning the recognition of the force majeure circumstances of the COVID pandemic in the context of state supply. But this was only a part of a more general plan targeted at supporting all businesses by the Russian government. In 2020, the total amount of support measures is over 3 trillion rubles, about 600 billion rubles have been allocated for small businesses specifically. We have also, our government has identified priority industries that have suffered most from the COVID pandemic. And thanks to this focus, targeted measures have been implemented, such as supporting tourism, supporting event industry, supporting non-government educational institutions, and so on and so forth. These are precisely the industries and areas where small businesses were mostly present. Additional measures, blanket measures for all businesses involved as follows: lowering and deferring compulsory payments for businesses, deferred payments or exemption from compulsory payments, for example, tax payments, leasing payments, or lease payments or rental payments, deferred fine payments, deferred tax payments, as I have already mentioned, or social security contribution deferrals. What was important to highlight is as follows: state measures of government support, and from the point of view of our service, are open for all businesses. Those companies that are entitled to access such measures, which are capable of demonstrating the need for such measures, they received this support. In addition, those measures were provided online. Application was possible online, and the business could almost automatically receive an immediate response. It was sufficient to log in into your service online, file an application, and automatically receive an approval for various support measures. Either it came as a response for certain financial measures, or even received to receive a reimbursement for excess tax payments. So this ensured that all of those measures were open for all, and all businesses were enjoying this equal playing field in order to access those support measures. In addition, the Russian government during the pandemic,
Andrei, if you could wrap up, please.
Curbed slightly various encumbering, to a certain degree, suspended large-scale process. They were, first of all, simplifying the access for public tenders and public procurement, were alleviating the rules and procedures and red tape. For example, in the 90s, thousands of outdated acts and decrees have been abolished. So the government was geared towards taking decisions rapidly and ensuring open access and equal access to support measures. These were very special and important conditions that have been met, very important measures to improve the situation for businesses. Thank you.
Spasiba, Andrei. Thank you very much. Now we have heard let's say, the views from the competition authorities and the measures that they have been put forward to the SMEs during this time of pandemic. Now let's turn back to the SMEs government agencies. I have here in my list two more representatives from Central Asia, Mrs. Nozigul and Mr. Bojan from Serbia. So I would like to ask the same question. How did NTMs implemented by governments to curb the spread of COVID-19 affect SMEs trade and supply chain activities? What can be done to increase the contribution of NTMs to improve SMEs market access and recovery? So you have, please, 5 minutes. You will have more opportunity to speak as the other speakers as well, but we need to give opportunity to everybody. I would like to first invite to Mrs. Nozigul.
Thank you, Pierre.
You could open your camera. I cannot see you. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Can I share my screen?
Yes. Please be short. Thank you.
Yes. Slideshow, да?
We can see the computer. So
yes, just where my presentation.
Okay.
From the do you,
yes.
It's okay? Yes?
Yes.
Dear participant, first of all, I would like, I am from the Tajikistan, but today I will little bit turn from the national policy to the regional perspective. And I would like to present a result of survey that's mentioned by my colleagues Hannah from UNECE. This survey aimed to assess how the non-tariff measure using by SPECA country during the COVID pandemic influenced to the trade. The study proved what you mentioned before. During this survey, based on phone interview, about 30 forwarders from the SPECA country who could and who can answer, send their questionnaires, and this questionnaire mostly include a lot of topics related to trade facilitation and the digital problems that they are facing during the COVID. The assessment showed that SPECA country use limited non-tariff measure. More visible, it's a temporary export ban of medical supplier and certain food items. And also in some cases we see how the border crossing point was closed for the temporary time. But the non-tariff measure using to prevent the COVID have impact to trade. But if you're looking to the lack of trade facilitation measure, it's impact more than non-tariff measures. Just one examples. If we're looking to the trade facilitation is the key tools for reducing physical contact, we in the SPECA country, we didn't use this during COVID in fully as effective facilitation tools. Because one reason, if you look to the SPECA countries, there are no sustainable basis for the trade facilitation. A lack of adequate trade facilitation also less the SME competitiveness at the market. During the interview, forwarders noted the problem of lack of update information, especially on the border control procedure. And this problem facing more than 6 months during the pandemic, when the traders starting to find information not from the state bodies, but trying to use themselves from the neighboring countries, from the partners, but it was a long time and they lose a lot of resources that's necessary for the developing of the business. The information, it's not the new problem it's facing during the pandemic, because it was before, but during the pandemic it was more actual. The drivers coming to the border, they don't know where and how they cross the border. They lose the time. This has led to big quiz and also effective in turn to the quality of the products. Also, another problems, it's unnecessary documentary checking. In some bodies, the state agency asking the documents, it's not necessary for the safety and for healthy, like it's just one example that's mentioned by forwarders, that's they asking the contract. The body guys asking contract, it's not the function and the body control. It's just one example how the documentary checking influenced to the trade facilitation during the pandemic. And also difficult to obtain the documents, it related to the digital problems, because most of document in SPECA countries, especially in the Central Asia, it's a hard copy documents, no digital services at the border. The most state agencies lack proper IT infrastructure, like information technology, information equipment, which need to facilitate control during the pandemic. Electronic documents, I mentioned that's in some cases including the certification and also the COVID test. It was the big problem during the pandemic because it's not recognized but by each countries. This was a problem, also lead to the quiz and a lot of problem between the borders. The forwarders, they raise the issues how to make easy to get testing, COVID test certificate by driver who are driving for the, like mostly for the transit issues. This is also the big problems. And if you're looking to the freight forwards businesses, they are also lack proper IT infrastructure. They not used as GPS and software. In general, the most country have outdated car fleets, which affect to provision of long distance services. Is it also the reduce the competitiveness of SME in Central Asia? Especially respondent from the Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, they raised the issues with poor internet connection, especially at the border. And simplification or just trade facilitation was more actual during this pandemic, and it should be all government and international sides who are supported with the project should look into the problems of trade facilitation from another aspects. Another issues I mentioned it, it's digitalization problems. And also, if you're looking to the border, there are two problems, like trade facilitation and lack of digitalization services. But there are also problems was raised by forwarders. It's problem of my colleagues, previous speakers mentioned it about sustainability of SMEs. Companies are vulnerable because they couldn't support the business in more than 6 months. Most of companies from the SPECA country, they mentioned that they have resources just for 4-6 months. Without any assistance, they cannot keep their businesses for the long time. And also there are problems that most of our carriers and our forwarders, they have not long-term contract for delivery services, and this is also the big problem for the companies. And another, yes?
Your time is up. I'll give you 30 seconds more to wrap up, please. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're finished already, it seems.
I am not finished early, but just 2 minutes regarding some recommendation. There are a lot of recommendations raised by forwarders, but 2 recommendations. It's so important for during the pandemic, pandemics. It's electronic recognized certification of the COVID test, especially for the drivers. It should be raised not just within regional dialogue, but mostly with engagement, with support of international sides like UNCTAD and UNECE. This is big problems, and this should be based for the implementation of trade facilitation and digital services for the future. Like we starting with digitalization and recognition of the test, and then we go slowly to the other digitalization of other services at the border. And the other topics, it's raised by forwarders, it's a green corridor for the perishable goods. This is more important for the SPECA countries, where the agricultural, it's increased, and we from the Central Asia looking to the other markets. And this is also important to start with piloting some green corridor for the perishable goods and include all services to this corridor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will suggest the speakers to stick to the time. I know it's difficult. I have this situation where I have to stop you, but please bear with us on this point. please, our colleague from Serbia, you have the floor, Bonjan, for your first intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horna. So, greetings from Belgrade, from the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Serbia. Привет из Белграда, уважаемые дамы и господа. Спасибо большое за приглашение.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your invitation. I hope very much for our fruitful cooperation with the UNCTAD as well.
To show you a brief presentation.
If you could be very brief, please.
Of course.
Participants will, in any case, look at your presentations.
Of course.
Thank you.
So it was talking on the behalf of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Serbia. It was a great pleasure for us to help the UN-ECE to do their survey, the impact of COVID-19 on trade and structural transformation in Serbia. And I would like to express my gratitude to our colleague, Ms. Hana Daudi from UN-ECE. And also special thanks goes to my colleague, Jelena Vasic from PKS, Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Serbia, who helped to ensure a representative sample of 726 micro, small, and medium enterprises, representative in terms of size of company, region, and main economic sector. As you know, in the beginning of this, let's say, medical crisis, coronavirus pandemic, the main problem was a disruption in supply chain. And some of the key findings of the survey was that slow issuance of trade documents for the goods transported across the border, because the administrative system is still paper-based and with relatively low level of digitalization. Also, lack of basic infrastructure of land border control points, which was also the problem, especially for the perishable goods. But thanks to the transparency measure and, of course, the swift information sharing between local institutions in Serbia and institutions abroad, the business uncertainty was alleviated significantly. On the other hand, what is also important that companies, talking about exporting companies that try to engage in trade, their ability to engage in trade was undermined by inflated transfer costs combined with lower international demand. But companies in Serbia used various strategies to overcome that problems, like it was a combined shipment with other companies to reduce the cost of road transport, and of course to refocus export to other countries with, let's say, softer lockdown. Also, they try to renegotiate delivery deadlines. It was also important for the companies that had strong relations with partners. But talking about our economic structure of the economy of Serbia and also government support, according to survey, talking about exporting companies, around 46%, according to survey of companies, succeeded to regain their pre-pandemic export by October 2020, but the problem was that 70% of companies had to totally suspend exports in 2020. Talking about the future of, let's say, business environment in Serbia and in the region, and of course on the global scale, there are lingering effects of the pandemic, like reduction of production capacity, which was, let's say, according to survey, recorded at 40% of companies. Also, due to deferred business payments, the debt burden is on the rise, which could be also a problem of solvency in the future. And also, what is quite interesting for us and very strong, let's say, information is that 41% of surveyed owners of the businesses use their personal savings to cover the business expenses, which is, let's say, quite important about their will to save the business important for their living. And of course, the majority of companies, almost 80%, relied on the government support measures, which were much, let's say, important, very important for the preservation of liquidity and employment here in Serbia. Talking about significance of MSME sector in Serbia, we have to find solutions for better access to finance for the companies to preserve their liquidity and solvency, as I already mentioned. And it could be done through the guarantee schemes agreed between the government and commercial banks. We already did here in Serbia in 2020. And also to, let's say, increase the participation of our small, medium, and micro companies in supply chains led by large companies, as well as to have those companies to have better access to the infrastructural projects run by the government, since it will be one of the key economic drivers in the midterm period. Also, it's important for our economies to do more on the regional cooperation. That's why we're going to the responsibility of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Serbia, since we are the general representative of the business community through our network consisting of 18 business associations and 17 regional chambers of commerce, which thanks to that we cover the whole economy in Serbia. We also promoting internalization of Serbian company, since our growth model is export oriented, and we put a lot of effort to solve the problem, which is the main threat to our sustainable growth in the longer period of time, and it's related to the negative demographic trend. Also, we are aware of necessity to include digitalization more in the business processes, and of course, circular economy. The latest information from the Chamber of Commerce in Serbia that we established a digital circular economy platform, which was in cooperation with the United Nations, UNDP, and German GIZ. Talking about our future activities, which could also help the sector of micro, medium, and small and medium enterprises, we put a lot of effort to increase our informative analytical capacity, and also, of course, also to include some new indicators measuring the Serbia's economy, like PMI index. And we also do it in the cooperation with international organizations and the academic community, both in the country and abroad. I will use also this opportunity to invite you to visit the site of Chamber of Commerce, and of course our analytical page, which could be quite helpful for further cooperation between Serbia and countries like from Central Asia, from Eastern Europe, and the rest of the world. So thank you once again for your attention.
Thank you very much for your attention. I wish you all the very best. I wish you health and a good summer to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your sharing of your experience here. I would like now to turn to the question number 2. And now for that, we have 4 additional speakers from Kyrgyz Republic, from Armenia, from the Western Balkans Chamber Investment Forum, and from an institution called Exportsa in Moldova. For that, again, I kindly ask you to stick to the time of 5 minutes. And I will start first with Mrs. Aysulu from the Kyrgyz Republic. You have the floor. Please turn on your camera. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from the Issyk-Kul Lake in Kyrgyzstan. It's a pleasure to be here today. So my intervention will focus on the Kyrgyz MSMEs experience, and specifically the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges that they face in this regard. But let me start first with providing a brief overview of our economy to give you a context in which our MSMEs operate. So the country's economic potential has remained largely untapped, despite opportunities offered by our beautiful mountainous terrain and abundant natural resources, including water and subsoil reserves. Our country is a lower middle income economy, with the GDP per capita totaling to $1,300 US in 2019. The largest contributor to our GDP is the services sector, accounting for more than 45% of its share, followed by manufacturing and agriculture. And the economy relies heavily on worker remittances and a single gold mine called Kumtor, particularly vulnerable to external shocks. So it is unfortunately then no surprise
И, к сожалению,
has been hit particularly hard by the COVID-19 pandemic and measures taken to contain it. For the service sector, including tourism, wholesale and retail trade, restaurants, as well as our textile and apparel sector. As for the MSMEs and their role in our economy, it cannot be overstated. Not only do they an important source of employment, growth and innovation, especially for women and youth, for example. So, for example, in 2019, they contributed to 44.5. The importance, MSMEs are the most vulnerable and least resilient, and therefore have been the most affected by the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, according to the survey conducted by UNDP in Kyrgyzstan and UNCTAD among Kyrgyz SMEs in May 2020, 94% of respondents reported that they have been negatively affected by the pandemic. Most of them had to temporarily close their business, lay off some personnel, or send them to unpaid leave. But even before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, Kyrgyz MSMEs have remained on the sidelines of trade policy, including the policymaking process and government support measures, and were struggling to integrate into global economy, including regional or global value chains. Obstacles faced by our MSMEs are numerous. Some challenges are more pronounced in one sector than another, and they can also vary among various actors of value chain. For example, in the agriculture sector, one of the most persistent issues has been fragmented production, which results in the inability of our producers and exporters to compete on international markets in terms of volume and price. And speaking of a level playing field that was mentioned earlier, as I was speaking actually to a farmer here at Issyk Lake today, he did mention that subsidies provided by larger countries to their farmers do negatively affect his the competitiveness of his products on those markets. Another example is the textile and apparel sector that was also affected quite heavily, where the border closure associated with the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in the disruption of their production, because lots of our producers depend on fabrics from China, Turkey, and Italy. But there are also some common challenges that are faced by all SMEs in Kyrgyzstan. First of all, it is asymmetrical access to information. It is particularly acute for MSMEs because, for example, in contrast to larger firms, MSMEs are far less their products. For example, more often than not, small exporters cannot afford having or hiring a specialized team to conduct market research or ensure compliance with their with varying and often complicated trade regulations that are not uniform across export markets or products. Furthermore, as MSMEs are unable to achieve economies of scale, as was also mentioned by our other colleagues in their presentations. So they also export in smaller volumes, which results in higher per unit export-related cost, and in them being disproportionately affected by trade barriers. For example, another set of trade obstacles is non-tariff barriers, as was discussed earlier as well, and because they range widely from technical barriers to trade to licensing requirements to red tape. For example, for Kyrgyz businesses, compliance with mandatory and voluntary quality standards as well as other technical regulations pose a substantial challenge. The costs involved in collecting the relevant information, the implementation process, and finally certification are often considered as too high for them. This is also exacerbated by the high number of private standards and the variety of technical requirements across different export markets, as well as the weak national quality infrastructure. Another major constraint is, of course, lack of access to finance, because the cost and risk of serving MSMEs are perceived to be high by our financial institution. Kyrgyz MSMEs cannot access long and cheap loans. Subsequently, they, for example, the ones who don't have inadequate collateral, for example, cannot obtain the most needed finances. So the pandemic has only further exacerbated these pre-existing challenges and exposed these vulnerabilities. So on the solution front, I guess I would like to just briefly flag two potential areas that could present us with opportunities to pave the way to MSMEs recovery in the future. I think these are sustainability and digitalization. And this is because the firms that have embarked on green and digital transition have been proved to be more resilient to external shocks. I think
we have problems with your audio. Maybe we can take up your intervention in the later stage. You have another opportunity to comment on each other's presentation. Thank you very much, Aisilu, for your intervention, your first one, actually. You will have another one. I would like now to invite Mr. Geborov from Armenia for his intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Let me share the screen. Thank you for the invitation. I'm representing Armenia, the Business Support Office that has been cooperating with our colleagues in UNECE, mainly with Ms. Hana Daudi. We have conducted surveys for the assessment on how COVID-19 has impacted the trade for MSMEs in Armenia. Just briefly, let me tell you that Armenia is a small but very bright and cultural country. We are World Trade Organization members since 2003. We are a member of different free trade agreements, mainly with Belarus, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and the Republic of Moldova, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Ukraine. We are a member of CIS countries. We are also a member of Eurasian Economic Union since 2015, and we are also benefiting from GSP and GSP Plus agreements and possibilities. The main partner for exports of Armenia is Russia, as you can see from the slide, and also you can see that there is a big gap between the imports and exports. So we are strongly working on decreasing this gap here. So during 2020, the main challenge, of course, has been COVID-19, but also the escalation of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict for Armenian businesses. From the COVID-19 perspective, I would say that a lot of problems in trade have been revealed during the survey. We have surveyed 370 MSMEs, and the main problems have been mainly the decrease of the demand by the international partners. The problem also was with the supplies, because many of the Armenian suppliers are importing their raw materials, and for example, the delays of raw materials has also influenced on the supplies for the international supplies of Armenian products. So this has also bring to delays in the supplies that Armenian producers had already contracted with their international partners or had to produce for later stages. So the lockdown started in March. So in January and February, a lot of shipments had already been undertaken, but a lot of contracts by MSMEs have been canceled or have been delayed due to the lockdown problems. The main challenges that have been raised as a result of the survey from the logistic issues is the fact that actually Armenia is a very landlocked country and also have two borders that are closed with Azerbaijan and Turkey. And also later in 2020, Armenian government has put an embargo on imports from Turkey, which has also brought some problems for Armenian SMEs who were importing different products from Turkey. So you see that the logistic issues are the #1 issues that have been raised by the respondents. The road and railway connections are underdeveloped, unfortunately, and that's a problem. The air cargo is very limited and also very expensive. Whenever it has possibilities for air shipments, still it's sometimes very expensive for Armenian SMEs. The other problem is, of course, digitization, that the custom clearance procedures are not fully digitized, and during the COVID period, it became more, a much stronger problem than it used to be before. Though there is a system that allows to declare the exports or imports by Armenian SMEs electronically, but still the issuance of the declaration is paper-based. The Armenian government is now working on making the full process electronic, and also to have a notification system that will make it easier for the SMEs to import or export. The main weaknesses by the MSMEs that have been revealed is the compliance with the regulatory requirements, because still Armenian government has been working a lot on improving the regulations and the legislation, but for many SMEs it's still very complex and very difficult to comply with all the requirements. Also, the lack of quality infrastructure systems bring to low level of safety, health, and environmental protection in export markets, which is also a problem. But access to skilled labor at affordable prices has been also raised as a problem by the Armenian MSMEs, and other issues that are not reflected here is mostly access to finance or tax regulations. During the COVID period, Armenian government has introduced 23 different measures on supporting and helping MSMEs to fight with the pandemic. Mostly this has been in line supporting with the access to finance issues, with different small or medium company loans, mostly targeted support to different areas, for example, the hotels and hospitality related MSMEs, restaurants, cafes, tour agencies, etc., that have been mostly affected by the pandemic. From the competitiveness view,
wrap up, please.
Okay, just two main competition issues. The first one, that there is a lack of communication with the competition authorities and the MSMEs. And the second one, that MSMEs have problems with the access to the public procurement. I would like to say that we already have good results on these two items, in these two aspects. Just like 1 hour ago, the government of Armenia adopted new procedure for the MSMEs to access to the public procurement. It has been decreased, the barriers and problems have been like 5 times decreased, and it will be a huge possibility for Armenian SMEs to access public procurement. I just would like to say that Armenian SMEs, with all these kind of problems and limits, are very smart, creative, and innovative to be able to survive, and also to compete with international different MSMEs, and they are our heroes here in Armenia. That is what we say. And just briefly, Business Support Office is a office that supports the government and the private sector to have a public-private dialogue to promote and improve the business environment in Armenia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing the experience of Armenia, which is extremely interesting and relevant to this discussion. Now let me invite Mrs. Tatiana Serskova, Coordinator, Western Balkans Chamber Investment Forum. Ms. Tatiana, you have the floor, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Peter. Let me just share my presentation. I will try to be as brief as possible.
Thank you very much. We appreciate.
Sorry, do you see the?
Yes. You have 3 slides, so that's very good news. Go ahead.
Yes, I will try to keep as brief as possible. I'm representing today the Chamber Investment Forum, that is the association of the 6 national. Sorry, I have a message. Is everything showing okay?
If you could move and put maybe presentation mode, that would be better. Thank you.
Is it okay now?
Yes, there's a little bit of a stain there, but you can continue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm speaking on behalf of the 6 national chambers joined in the Chamber Investment Forum. That is the association representing more than 350,000 small and medium companies in the Western Balkans region. And in addition to all other participants in today's panel stated, we must be aware that MSMEs are the backbone of our economies. That is especially the case in the Western Balkans, where they count up to more than 99% of the total number of enterprises in the region. And we see them as the key to ensuring economic growth, innovation, social integration, and more importantly, job creation. In the 6 economies of the Western Balkans, even before the pandemic, these companies employed between 60 and 80% of the active population, a rate that is even higher than the average of the European Union countries. It goes without saying that these were the companies that were most hardly hit with the pandemic. Data shows that on average, their revenue declines were 40% in the few months from the outbreak of the pandemic. And they reached out up to 70% around the peak of the crisis. And that is much more on the average of 45% from the developed countries. So this means that we have much to be working on in order to help and to support these companies. Limitations to free movement contributed in a significant share to the losses that were faced by the micro, small and medium enterprises in the region. This pandemic, in fact, has supplemented a situation that was already troublesome for the companies operating in the region that were dealing with regional trade. And that is the issue of all the procedural and regulatory barriers that these companies were facing even in the situation or in the times before the outbreak of the pandemic, let's call it in the old normal situation or business environment for the companies all over the world. The World Bank study from several years ago indicates that in the Western Balkans region, trucks at border crossings were losing more than 26 million hours yearly, or that is approximately 80% of their total travel time, which is lost in standing still at borderlines, waiting for clearance procedures and preparing all the required documents, certificates, and analysis, undergoing different inspections and control by different regional state authorities at every separate border crossing point in the region. This leads to the situation that even in the times before the pandemic, only 10 to 20% from the total number of micro, small, and medium enterprises in the countries, all 6 countries from the Western Balkan region, were even encouraged to get into foreign trade activities or to start exporting to the region or to some other more distant third markets. So even before the pandemic, we had the problem of easing digital connectivity and involvement in in regional trade of these companies. Why am I referring to this data on the pre-pandemic status quo or situation? It is because that this situation partly holds the key to swift recovery from those issues. We all witnessed the devastating effects that the strengthened border controls and all the introduced additional representative measures introduced by border inspector services had on regional trade, even in the EU single market, and that is even more emphasized in the situation of the Western Balkans countries, which all represent countries from developing region. In this situation, the long waiting lines in border control points in the first weeks following the outbreak of the pandemic that were bringing also into question even the supply of the necessary products such as medicines or food, has pushed the regional authorities to act as soon as possible and has led to the introduction of the green lines in the Western Balkans region in a relatively short period of time. In normal circumstances, we must admit that it would have taken years for the national authorities from all 6 countries to agree on accepting the method of pre-arrival notifications, electronic exchange of information between border control authorities, and to enable 24 hours, 7 days a week operations of the border agencies at defined border crossing points along the main corridors. In normal circumstances, that would have taken a long time of harmonization of the documents and acceptance or agreement on how it should be performed. And yet today, we have the very positive example of the functioning of the green corridors. In fact, it is so successful that it is in the final stages of being expanded, not only within the Western Balkans region, but also towards the border crossing points linking the region to the EU countries. And that is, in fact, the point of my presentation, that we jointly should focus and pay utmost importance to the elimination of procedural and regulatory barriers in trade and transition to paperless trade, which will certainly ease the company's position and assist them in their recovery efforts. Additionally, I would like to reflect on—
Wrap up, please. Your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. I would, since the time is limited, I will also try to pinpoint one more additional issue, and that is the issue of inclusion of digital trends in the operations of micro, small, and medium enterprises, and the essential importance of this issue in the recovery efforts of these companies. Technology is helping firms to adjust that shock, but data shows, however, that less than 1/3 of companies have been able to increase the use of digital technology, and that in fact bears on the issue that they have not sufficient capabilities, managerial practice, and do not have experiences on adjusting efficiently to digital trends. The key for this would be to push the inclusion of micro, small, and medium enterprises in the global value chains in order to encourage them not only to be mere users of digital trends or technologies, but also to push or to enable the transfer of technology towards them in the region, so that they can be brought in the position to contribute to the future development of these digital technologies, and certainly securing the proper level of protection of IP rights within all national authorities would have a vital role in this process. With this, I would wrap up my intervention. I kindly thank you for the possibility to address you today. And I kindly ask you or invite you all to follow the activities of the Western Balkans Chamber Investment Forum for all the activities directed towards removing the obstacles for regional economic integration, supporting the sustainable development of the region, and improving the business and investment climate within the 6 countries from the Western Balkan region. I thank you all.
Thank you very much. Now, let me invite Mr. Sterbet from Moldova, Exportsa, Director, Private Sector, Trade Support Institution, Exportsa. Mr. Sterbet, you have the floor.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much for giving me a floor. So I'm trying to share my presentation. Just a moment, please.
We don't have the possibility to see you or see your presentation. Thank you.
Just a moment.
Yes.
So do you see it?
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
I have 5 minutes. And of course, I was prepared to speak on both topics. On the first question on non-tariff barriers and digital trade. So I'll pass non-tariff barriers, but before to go to digital trade, I would like to show a picture of the country of Moldova before pandemic, and also the picture of the companies before pandemic. So already at the beginning of 2020, we have registered slowing down of the economy. The budget deficit was increasing. Then key macroeconomic indicators were declining, especially exports. And then Moldova has a low level of competitiveness, low level of economic freedom, and high level of corruption. This is the whole country pictures. Now about the companies. So, unfortunately, the companies were unprepared for the pandemic. So they entered in the crisis without any cash buffers, with internal governance poorly adapted to crisis management, low level of technological endowment, limited capacity to manage digital tools, and low level of diversification of supplies and sales channels. So all these weaknesses have increased substantially with onset of the pandemic. And just to show, to give you some pictures at which we found during our survey. So about 55% of the enterprises lost their main export partners. All enterprises reported supply shortages. All reduced their productive capacities. And only 40% of enterprises were able to repurpose their production. So unfortunately, I can say that the government intervention was quite weak to support the companies and to help them to compete on the market. So just one figure to say to you that the total intervention of the Moldovan government was accounted about 0.5% of GDP, which was about 6 times less than anti-crisis programs implemented by the areas, implemented by governments in the near, let's say, countries. So what was one of the conclusions of the situation, company situation, when pandemic starts? That business models which are used by most of the Moldovan companies are outdated and need to be changed, and digitalization is one of the key issues which should be addressed. And now I'm going to the part of the digital trade. So, unfortunately, in Moldova, when we are talking about digitalization, the only issue is seen to have a website or to have a platform for which you can sell your products. This is the only, let's say, main areas where companies see that digitalization should be made. And if you look to the statistics, then we will see that just 1 in 4 companies in Moldova has a website. Only 412 e-commerce platforms are operating in the company. And when we are saying about e-commerce platforms, it means the platforms which are using some such payment instruments like credit cards or another types of digital payments when they are selling the products through these web platforms. And during the survey, we found that only 32% of enterprises figured e-commerce as important coping mechanism for them. So what are the problems? Why e-commerce is still not so widely implemented in Moldova? First of all, if it is lack of necessary equipment, then there is a lack of ICT skills. Then also some companies are afraid, or they are have low confidence that they will be able to compete in the domestic or in the cross-border trading. So, and another issue which was highlighted by companies, it was that there is ambiguous legislation. Some of the issues might be interpreted, and especially there is unclear, let's say, regulation regarding the international deliveries and custom procedures for such type of deliveries. So what can be done? First of all, there is a need to adjust legislation to make it functional, applicable, and unambiguous in the spirit of the new digital single market strategy. Then support local SMEs in accessing e-commerce tools through grants and subsidies, especially for the development of online marketing and sales platform, electronic payment instruments, and of course, there is a need for training of employee to manage in effective manner of this mechanism. And the last issue is there is a need for this digitalization in the public sector and in the interaction of this sector with the business environment. So this is my presentation.
Thank you very much for.
I wanted to be very short.
Thank you. You did indeed very well. To be short, as we are already 2 hours and a half, and there's overall Zoom fatigue in times of COVID. You know, being more than 2 hours connected online, it's always a very challenging for everybody, including the participants. Which, of course, we thank them for being online until now. In order to wrap up this panel discussion, since we have to finalize this very important conference, I have a couple of questions that I would like to address to some of the speakers, but if they can answer in 1 minute, that would be challenging, I know, but no slides this time, in terms of saying yes or no and why. That's it, in 1 minute, so then we can go quickly and get the best of it in terms of your experience and your concrete messages. You can also refer to some documents that will be already, let's say, shared by UNCTAD and UNECE, including the BRICS Competition Center as partner. So let me first ask a question to Mr. Andrei Tsiganov from FAS. So the question is as follows: what strategies, from your point of view, could SMEs, in conjunction with competition authorities, put in place to ensure a level playing field post-crisis? And the question goes a little bit in terms of whether regional, bilateral, or international cooperation could be an important factor among competition authorities and relevant government and ministries from SMEs in order to face these challenges and overcome these obstacles? If you can just say in 1 minute, Andre, I know it's a very huge question, but perhaps you can just wrap up what you said earlier in terms of cooperation between competition authorities and SMEs, government agencies. Andre, 1 minute. Спасибо.
Я попробую.
Thank you very much. I will try answering from the end of your question, Pierre. Of course, cooperation between the competition authorities and state bodies which are engaged in supporting SMEs is crucial. It's very important. We are gearing our effort towards one single objective, namely, we are creating a competitive environment on all markets, regardless of how many SMEs are engaged in this or that market. We are gearing towards creating competitive environment, favorable environment by reducing bureaucracy and red tape. I will remind that there are norms and regulations in our legislation that allows us to repeal certain measures or requirements imposed by the Russian legislation in order to facilitate functioning of small businesses. This is a possibility for the Russian companies. Another important aspect is to follow certain general or comprehensive principles that we should work out together and jointly. For example, accessibility, predictability, and certainty of rules of how support measures are provided. Right now, as we speak, the government of the Russian Federation is holding a press conference involving Mr. Reshetnikov, who is the Minister of Economic Development, and they're talking specifically about measures to support small and medium businesses. I would particularly highlight a special project, concerning the targeted subsidies for small businesses. By applying an electronic form for a particular type of subsidy and substantiating the application, companies can obtain a loan at 3% per annum, which is much lower than the central bank's rate, which is currently over 4%. In addition to that, there is another support program, which is targeting employment at various businesses, including small businesses. That program provides access to funding at 2% per annum. If a company managed to keep its personnel and didn't fire anyone, then they would be able to even write off a portion of their debt. This is a program that is currently a big priority for us. It encompasses a large number of businesses who are competing with one another. Access to finance makes lending institutions compete between themselves in order to offer the most competitive offer for businesses in terms of providing finance. Of course, we have to work on competition, not only in specific segments of economy, but also embracing other markets, markets which involve infrastructure, which are also important for small businesses. Thank you.
Spasiba, Andrei, and thank you for
very much, Andrei.
Time. I just would like now to refer to the same question to an SMEs government agency. Again, 1 minute, please. In this regard, I would like to ask Georg from Armenia the same question that
It's more important that you
that I suggested to the Russian Federation in terms of what would be cooperation available for competition agencies and SMEs government agencies to as an strategic vision for for overcoming the obstacles of this crisis. Jörg, you have 1 minute, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre. A very interesting question because, as I already said in my presentation, the communication between the competition authorities and the MSMEs in Armenia is not on a good level, let's say, and we have had 2 meetings within the last week engaging the competitiveness authorities to see, for example, how they can communicate better with the small and micro, small and medium businesses. Mostly because competitiveness authorities are concentrated, or big companies, big corporations, mostly if we are talking about trade, mainly retail chains, and trying to intervene between different retail chains and the competition between them. But we need also be more concrete on the competition between the small producers and the possibilities and availabilities that the retail chains present. And mostly if we talk about the pandemic period, when many international corporations have stopped and small producers can think only about selling their products in the local market, where we have a lot of these big retail chains, and sometimes there are very bad connections between the chains and the small producers. They don't want to work with many different small producers. They are more comfortable with only one big producer who can supply every day the product they are already aware of, etc. So here we introduced a new vision together with the competitiveness authority, which is about guidelines that show how, for example, big sale chains, trade chains, and supermarkets should better be cooperating with the small producers. So there is already available a huge guidelines that will be presented this next Monday at the government building to small and medium producers. So I think this is one of the best results, and we are now more concretely working on making these meetings, the dialogue between the competitiveness authorities and the small producers and MSMEs in Armenia to make it better. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this concrete answer. And now let me go back again to a head of a competition authority in Kazakhstan, Mr. Serikso Mangarin. 1 minute, please, for your last intervention. Thank you.
First of all, colleagues, I would like to emphasize not just the cooperation between the competition authorities and businesses, but the cooperation at the international level between countries. Certain states are members of certain economic unions, and for them, overcoming the pandemic is easier. A single common market, customs unions, all these structures of that kind facilitate trade and facilitate contacts. The second issue is regulatory environment, but Kazakhstan experience shows that there is a limit in terms of regulation. Maybe it might stimulate, regulation may stimulate business by 7 or 8%, but this is about the limit. Access to financing is another crucial point. The key problem for small businesses in our country is access to working capital, especially for manufacturing businesses, for industries. Countries that managed to set up clusters experience better conditions because they have created a certain system where a supplier and manufacturer are always present. when there are disruption of an ecosystem, of a supply chain, then the company suffers really greatly. Of course, when the borders were closed, everybody suffered. However, many speakers highlighted problems with logistics, with infrastructure, including transport, including good transit. These areas were badly hit. We believe that we have to focus first and foremost on removing barriers to access.
Thank you very much. I could not hear the last part of the interpretation, but in any case, my question now goes back to the press representative from Serbia, Borjan. The same question applies. Now we are in between the two different types of agencies. So please, your last intervention, 1 minute.
Thank you, Pierre. So from the point of view of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Serbia, what is the, let's say, the key formula for the sustainable growth, both in Europe and in the region of the Western Balkans? So it's less protectionist measures and more cooperation. And that should be a chance for our companies, since we are the market, developing market, to be more integrated in global trade. Just to use one, let's say, analytical example. So the total area of the Western Balkan, there lives around 18 million of people. And total GDP of the Western Balkans is equal to the GDP of Slovakia, in which live, let's say, around 5.5 million of people. Total total export of the Western Balkans is only 40% of total export of Slovakia. So we need to be more integrated in the value chain, in the supply chains, on the regional and as well on the level of the global scale. So we need more cooperation. We need more support from the international organization. We're doing our best to, let's say, to make this environment more business attractive, which is also affirmed by the credit ratings of the, for example, Fitch agency and Standard & Poor's. We have a BB+ rating with stable outlook for further improvement, which is also only one notch below the investment grade we're trying to reach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 2 minutes before the closing ceremony of this conference. So I would like to invite 2 more representatives. First of all, if Mrs. Nosigul is still around, if she wants to answer the question. Mrs. Nosigul, you have the floor. 1 minute, please. I think we have problems with Mrs. Nosigul. So then I would like to invite Mrs. Tatiana from Western Balkan Chamber Investment Forum for the last minute of intervention. Thank you, Tatiana.
Yes, hi, do you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead. 1 minute.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will try to be even more brief than 1 minute. I will just add on everything that was stated by colleague Bojan from the Serbian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, because in part we add on the same goals and activities being joined in the Western Balkan 6 Chamber Investment Forum. And it is our position that the potential for growth can be best reaped for Western Balkans countries if we cooperate more closely together. That is the motto of the Western Balkans Chamber Investment Forum, one region, one economy. And then only can be done by increasing the, let's say, cooperation and the level of trust, and eliminating as much as possible all the barriers towards enforcing the 4 freedoms within the region. That is, do the maximum to enable the free flow of people, goods, services, and capital throughout the region. I kindly thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, certainly the head of the Uzbekistan Competition Authority for your last intervention, particularly the question that I asked your two colleagues from the Russian Federation and Kazakhstan. Please, Mr. Karabek, you have the floor. 1 minute.
Thank you. Well, as Uzbekistan is growing economy, but also very deeply affected by the pandemic and the crisis, economic crisis. From our experience, what we can propose first is, as our colleagues mentioned, that the regulatory framework, the regulatory environment is very crucial to ease the regulatory barriers to enter the markets. The second, of course, integration is regional integration is very important. As Uzbekistan, now we are on negotiation process on accession of WTO and the signing agreement with EU. We see that integration will positively affect on competitive environment in national economy. But of course, it's very also one thing is important to create a cooperation with, as for example, from point of view or our country, where still the government participation is high, to create a sort of cooperation between small SMEs and big companies, maybe state-owned companies, I mean, this is temporary maybe measure, but still have the quite good effect in a very small period to create a cooperation. But again, as a competition authority, we need to check this cooperation in order not to distort the competition. So these 3 points I would like to mention, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karabek. And with that, we have finished this panel discussion. I see that there are more interventions. We will have to wrap up because of time. In this regard, I would like to invite the representative from UNECE, Mr. Mika. He's there. Maybe also Mrs. Ahana. Also, we would like to invite them here. Ms. Teresa Moreira, you are there. Thank you very much for still being with us all this time. And also Mika, thank you very much. And of course, Alexei Ivanov. You are also here with us. Thank you very much for being still connected to this very long meeting. We had summary of discussions, but because of time, we cannot proceed on doing this. We will go directly to the closing remarks. So first, I would like to invite with the reverse order, as we did earlier. With that, first we invite Alexei, and then Mika, and finally we end up with Teresa closing the event. So please, Alexei, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you, Pierre. And I understand that we actually managed to keep about 100 people online for quite a while, which is in the course of pandemic. I think it's a great achievement already. So dialogue has successfully achieved its at least basic purpose to keep people together and engage into this type of discussion and conversation about SMEs. And I think it's quite a fruitful outcome is that at least competition authorities started to think about different new methods and approach to support SMEs. And I think when they're going to be back to work, probably they would prioritize SMEs development of competition. And it's very kind of inspiring to hear, for instance, from Serik Zhumangarin that a new agency is called development of competition in the country rather than just protection. And SMEs, they do need this type of development, this type of proactive activity in the context of post-pandemic recovery and digital economy in general. So I hope that we at least put some seeds of of thoughts and probably of some sort of doubts about efficiency of the current competition policy in the context of supporting SMEs into the heads of people involved in decision making, and probably we can build something together. And it's great that our regional dialogue spread across the whole Eurasian continent, basically starting from Western Balkans to Pacific Ocean. And that's the area which has to rethink probably its future of joint cooperation and joint coexistence. And we have a number of integration projects here going on. And as it was rightly mentioned, integration helps to overcome difficult times. So I think the cooperation and some sort of, support, mutual support in the context of post-COVID-19 pandemic recovery would be a key for prosperity and success in competitive sector of competition and competitive dynamic and development. So thank you, everyone, and I hope we keep in touch. It's not the end of discussion, and please, we're happy to get any feedback on the note, on background note, which we distributed, and thanks to UNCTAD and UNECE for this great initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexei. And now let me invite Mika from UNECE, Chief of Market Access. Please, Mika, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I believe, and I'm sure that most of us here today would also agree with me that as governments proceed in planning post-COVID-19 recovery, they need to attach greater importance for generating synergies. And I think that the presentations that we have heard today have highlighted the complex challenges that governments are facing in improving market access conditions for enterprises, in particularly small and medium-sized enterprises. Trade and competition policy offer really, really important, good tools for addressing these challenges while ensuring comprehensive market integration. And the continuous reduction of tariffs in today's globalized world obviously only increases the importance of non-tariff measures. Non-tariff measures are and can be used for addressing problems arising from the interface between competition and trade facilitation measures related to border control, market surveillance, offer excellent alternative tools to safeguard and anti-dumping measures, and then technical regulations ensure consumer and competition-oriented trade policies. So promoting standards implementation offers means of enhancing competition. This is all what we have been discussing, and we are really, really grateful to colleagues in UNCTAD for having, organizing this event. This has been a really, really good discussion. We are looking forward to having the report, and then obviously we will take further steps based on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mika, and also I would like to thank your colleague Hannah for the extremely great job she has been doing in working with us from the beginning of this project. Now I would like to invite Mrs. Teresa Moreira to finalize this conference. Teresa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Pierre. I can be very brief. I would like to say that, first of all, to thank very much again our colleagues from UNECE, our colleagues and friends also from the BRICS Competition Policy Center, but a very special word to all the speakers and to all the participants, as I think the discussions were extremely interesting. As Alexei mentioned, we do believe that this is the beginning and not the end, definitely for this project, which will last until the end of 2021. We are foreseeing more activities. I think the synergies that Mika mentioned are really the key issue at the core of all these discussions to allow for, an inclusive actually in UNCTAD, we also say a green and inclusive economic recovery. I would add probably, and a competitive economic recovery where MSMEs are allowed enough opportunities for them to flourish. But it is true that it has been through a number of these events, in this case, organized under the development account COVID-19 response, that the Competition and Consumer Policies branch of UNCTAD has been able to really get closer to UN regional economic commissions and several other partners. So we are also very thankful for this opportunity, because I think there are a number of overlaps that allow us to really plan for strengthened cooperation in the future. So we would like very much to hear from you. We will circulate the reports and notes that have been mentioned by participants. And we would like to very much to hear from the competition authorities of the CIS countries and from the SMEs authorities and other representatives that attended this conference, in order to really plan upcoming activities until the end of the year that are adjusted to the challenges, to the needs, and that will hopefully allow us to focus afterwards in a regular cooperation or regular discussions. Hopefully some of them physically. I don't know when, but it's at least a hope that I'm sure we all share. I would also like to take this opportunity to underline that UNCTAD will hold between 7 and 9 of July its annual intergovernmental group of experts meeting on competition law and policy, where we will be discussing issues that I am sure will be of interest to this audience. So I would start with competition advocacy during and in the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis, competition and regulation in the digital era. We will hear the voluntary peer review on competition law and policy of Malawi, but also we will hear on cross-border cartels, as we will organize a roundtable on cross-border cartels, which is also the topic of a recently established working group, a virtual working group that has drawn enormous interest and attention from competition authorities representatives and several other relevant stakeholders. So I do believe this is a topic that is of special interest to this audience. We also benefit from the collaboration of the BRICS Competition Law and Policy Center here. So I do see this topic and this working group as a forum to provide us the framework for future discussions and, why not, reports and studies. We will also be reporting on other issues. I would just mention here the implementation of a recently adopted document that is related to the UN set of principles and rules on competition, the guiding policies and procedures under Section F on international cooperation that seek to facilitate cooperation between developing countries, less experienced competition authorities, and developed countries or emerging countries, competition authorities. So this is one of the achievements of last year's UN Review Conference on Competition and Consumer Protection, of which we are very proud of. This was due to strong engagement from several of the CIS countries' competition authorities here present. And so I wanted also to mention this. To close, unfortunately, we expect the meeting to take place in a hybrid format, that is to say, mostly virtually for UNCTAD member states, competition authorities representatives. We are still putting together an agenda with all these learnings after a year of teleworking and organizing webinars. And this will be announced very soon, clearly by the beginning of April. And so I look forward to hearing from you and seeing you there. And I also look forward to the future developments of this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and thank you very much, dear colleagues. I would like that before we close, the usual photo session for everybody. So please, the speakers and the panelists and discussants, please open your cameras. we will now put the views in order to have sort of the traditional photo that we do in the real life. We're trying to accommodate that to the virtual part. So please bear with me. I don't know if my colleague Hannah is there in the photo. I don't see her in the screen. Hannah, thank you very much. And also the team in UNCTAD, Elona, Sophie. Unfortunately, my colleague Liz is not with us, but at least the heads of the agencies are here with us. Thank you very much. And all of us, then we will count up to 1, 3. Please smile and watch the camera. 1, 2, 3. Chuck. Thank you very much. And stay well, stay safe.
Bye.